Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Love First Christians topic study. This week, we're going to be going over the topic of redemption and what that means in the Christian perspective. Because, of course, from the discount shopper perspective, we all know what redemption is. That's when I bring in my little coupon and I show up at the discount aisle and I get my really cheap knockoff brand Wheaties. And then I show up at the front and I say, I got a redemption coupon for this one. And then I get the Wheaties and I pay nothing in exchange for it. Christian concept's slightly different than that. Some similarities, but we'll talk about that. And it's also very conflated with the concept of salvation as a whole. Redemption and salvation, I understand why they are conflated. They're very similar and oftentimes reference the same concept. However, when we talk about redemption, we're actually talking about a very specific aspect of salvation. So anyhow, that's what we're going to settle in for. I'm going to have some more speakers here. I appreciate everybody who's waiting for this one. I see the viewer count there. Hi, everybody. I'm happy to have you with us. So I'm going to go into a little background on this one here, get the dirty, boring details out of the way before my friends join in here. So when we talk about redemption, we obviously have a modern concept of it, but let's understand it in the way that they understood it back during those times, in the biblical times. And the concept of a redemption was when there was a slave and they would pay a ransom. And that act of somebody paying the ransom or they themselves working off that ransom was redemption. And when they achieved that redemption, they went from slavery to free. Now, obviously, in the general Christian concept, this is much the same. I could make this the shortest discussion ever. That's redemption, when you go from being slave to free. And this is what Christ does for us. Takes us and our enslaved selves and liberates us. He pays that ransom for us. But there's a lot of deeper diving we can do here. And when we're doing something like studying the concept of salvation, I figure why not, dig into it as much as we can here. So obviously, we recognize that we are enslaved by Satan. We talk about that a little bit because a lot of times we feel like we're free in Satan. Christianity seems so rigid sometimes. Don't cheat on people. Don't, be drunk and hurt people while you're drunk. Don't use foul language. Don't hurt people's feelings. Don't drive people off. You look at what Paul's recommendation are for the early churches, and it's very extreme. It's, hey, we got to get more service out of you. We got to, we got to focus on more temperance, more mildness, more goodness, and that feels very constricting. And so the allure of Satan is to be free. I'm free to do drugs. I'm free to have sex. I'm free to, with whoever, whenever. I'm free to, whatever it may be. Free to eat whatever I want, however much I want. Let's look at each of those and just say, how free are you really? Because when Satan gets you hooked on crack, that's not exactly freedom for anybody who's been on crack. You can verify this for me. It's not exactly easy as just putting it down after that point and just saying, that's not the lifestyle for me. I'm going to let this go. It was a fun experience. What happens is when you engage in these activities, they tend to chain you to them. I'm not big on one, I think Christians abuse the term sexual immorality a lot of the time. I'm not one of those. I'm certainly not a purity culture guy. Based on the Bible alone, I'm certainly not a, save sex only for a government documented marriage kind of guy. That's just not the kind of person how I am. That being said, there's still such a thing as sexual immorality. When you're having empty sex, no spirit, no friendliness, no love involved, that you need more of it to fill a void, and you're not actually filling that void. And then you just keep getting chained to that same cycle of empty sex. You see porn users talk about this a lot of the time, that when somebody's hooked on pornography, they're not exactly free to do what they want. We've got Aaron here. Aaron, how you doing, buddy?
That's a hell of an intro for me to come in on.
Yeah. Let's see. What I went over here was just I'm introducing the concept of redemption. Make it real quick recap here. Redemption during the biblical times was the process in which a slave got out of slavery by paying a ransom. And that process of paying that ransom was called redemption. So when you have a redeemer, this is somebody paying that ransom for you. So I was kind of starting with the slavery part of it, right? Why do we recognize that we're enslaved? And so I'm kind of talking about some sexual, I don't even want to say just that. I opened up a few different boxes, but one of which you popped in on.
Forms of slavery.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
It feels like you're free. Satan tricks you by saying you're free to do something. You're free to do crack. You're free to watch porn. You're free to eat as much as you want. But all those things chain you down, right? Like ultimately, if you get into a cycle of eating to deal with sorrow, you get into that cycle and you're not free anymore. You get into a cycle when you're hooked on drugs. You're not free anymore to just say, oh, I just won't do drugs anymore. It's just that simple. Whereas, if you haven't done them, then you are free to do them or not do them. Doesn't matter, right? You're free at any moment to make those choices. So yeah, you popped in on the sexual one where you start in on porn and then all of a sudden you get these unrealistic desires and then you keep going there for more and more and more. The people who abuse porn certainly have this unrealistic, unhealthy expectation of it. And they find that it damages their sexual relationships, kind of creating that now they're chained to pornography for fulfillment and can't have that fulfillment with their other partners. So any thoughts you have about slavery?
Yeah, I mean, as you say that, I'm reminded, the first thing that comes to mind as you say that is I'm reminded of this group that I just recently joined, a Facebook group. It's JRPG shitposting is the name of it. And my thought process was that it was going to be a whole bunch of memes about JRPGs.
That's what I would think. I'm ready already.
What you would think just based off the name alone. But actually, what it ends up being is almost exclusively about culture wars as it pertains to women in video games, their attractiveness. And as you're speaking about having unrealistic expectations and everything like that, I'm blown away by. At first, I thought it was trolling. Like, I just thought that these people were so, like, irony posting that they're constantly trolling for what they would like to see in games. But the more I look at it, it's not. I don't think they're actually trolling. I think they legitimately have grown up in such a culture that they only view women as attractive if they're like these hyper anime. I don't even know how to describe it. Like just complete incel vibes.
Living blow up doll. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And like, I don't know. I constantly detract people into politics in your biblical study, but now I'm going to like talk about game culture.
Much preferred to politics. Thank you.
I don't know anything about the Horizon Dawn or whatever it's called game.
I was gonna bring up Aloy and the hair, right?
Aloy, like, yeah, and the facial hair, like that's like a quintessential example. I don't know anything about the game itself. I just know about the talking point of her having like these barely visible peach fuzz on her face, and the guys were just absolutely disgusted by the idea that women can have beards because they have no relationship with actual real life women. Like my wife has like peach fuzz facial hair. It's completely normal. You wouldn't think twice about it, but if you don't have any actual experience with real people, you don't have that basis to draw from.
Yeah, it's amazing how much they told on themselves, right? Like how close have you actually been to a woman? Human beings, we're mammals, right? Mammals have hair. Like it's over your body, it's on your arm. Like women have arm hair that's barely visible most of the time, right? And this was an in-depth. If you remember the photo, it was that side of her face, right? Like of the image. This is an in-depth look on her face. You are very close to her, and yeah, if you're that close to somebody, you're just gonna see natural hairs. And to say she had a beard is doing it an injustice. As a normal human being who has any amount of sexual experience, if you look at this, you will not even notice the facial hair. I mean, it's really, you're just like, that's a very realistic looking human being. Part of what makes it realistic is that overlay, right? This isn't Detroit Become Human. this is a human being. This is a person. Although I played Detroit Become Human. They're human beings too. Don't want to get into that. Don't want to open a different game jar there. I could go on to the spiritual lessons in Horizon forever. It's one of my, I think honestly, the best writing I've seen in a series maybe ever. And it goes so far over gamers' heads. I will do everything I can to not get into it now. But you are absolutely right that there's this idea, and you are trapped by that idea. I think the idea that, you know, to bring it to what we're talking about with the slavery, it holds you there. This is why people get stuck in like the manosphere or in incel groups. I was part of it for a while, right? Like, so this is what got me there. Were you in the manosphere as well? Man, yeah. I was deep.
I got out. I was hardcore MRA identifying. Yeah, very much so. Right up until about 2000. Yeah, no, it was right up until about 2015 when Trump was running. And I was like, oh no, this is what I could become. And that sort of pulled me out of it. Like,
yeah. It's funny. Yeah, I had my limits as well. Like, you know, ultimately there was a certain, I was a woman hater until, you know, I got out of it. I'm grateful to be out of it now.
Convinced that feminists are all out to get you.
Right. But think of how secular that is, that you hate women, so you don't get women. So you hate women, so you don't get women. It's a trap, right? This is a slave trap.
And not only just that, but also you're constantly in these communities that reinforce those beliefs. So you get the information siloed like crazy. Like I was arguing with a person who still to this day identifies as an MRA, and they're talking about child courts being biased against men. And I'm like, that was true a decade ago, 2 decades ago. That's because of the results of feminists. That's far less true today than it was 10 years ago, because feminists have gone out of their way to address those issues, because they're not just anti-men. They're anti-sex, anti-discrimination. But
right, when you have a movement, it kind of works out the kinks, right? Like, let's be honest here, there are feminists that are anti-men, right? Like, I mean, Andrea Dworkin is just flat out anti-man. Like, she just is. But when you let a movement go on as opposed to just crushing it, like it becomes something better. I do think the men need to have a movement internally for ourselves. You know, when we talk about pulling the plank out of our eye, I do think there needs to be a men's movement like that, but it's not a men's rights movement. It's a men's, I don't know, similar to like Promise Keepers or something. Like, let's just be better men, right? Like, let's be better people. And I think there's something to that to help pull us out of there. But yeah, like you said, it gets you into this trap cycle. You find, you know, information that, if it's true, is very anecdotal or very limited to your experience. I think what spoke to me, I guess, heck, let's talk about it. I mean, we got time. What trapped me was the fact that nobody would validate my experiences except for the people in the manosphere. Like, anytime I had a bad dating experience, the only people who would listen to me were, you know, the incels. You know, I'd just be like, dude, I just had this terrible date, whatever. And you bring this out into the world and it's like, no, you didn't. You're just bad at dating, or you're a bad man, or, you know, so, and you just be like, oh my gosh, like that was not at all what I was saying, you know? And then you get some people to be like, yeah, that sounds like a terrible date, bro. Like that's awful. Like, you know, I remember I had this one date and I was in college at the time. And I went on a date and literally she saw some other guy and got busy with him in the bathroom of that restaurant that we went out to. And like, it was so horrifying to me. And it should be horrifying, right? Like, this is a non-normal experience. But like, if I talk about that, people would be like, well, how ugly are you? How poor are you? How stupid are you? Like, that she was so repulsed by you that she went and banged some other guy in the bathroom. And then I was so beta at the time, I drove her home right afterwards because I was dumb, right? I had no self-confidence, no ability to stand up for myself. But instead of instilling me with the confidence and the ability to stand up for myself and going out and seeking people that were right for me, it was women suck. That girl was representative of all women. Like, all women deeply like want to have this fun experience where they're banging people in restrooms, as opposed to that just being, you're in a college town, you're going to get a lot of crazy dates like this because people are working through their boundaries and everything, you know? And I wasn't looking for that. And I didn't Unfortunately, the people who cared enough to listen didn't actually care. They just wanted to take advantage of me and fill me with a whole bunch of like lies, you know, and a whole bunch of their perspectives and experiences. And it's a trap, you know, like it trapped me there forever, to the point where I just could not have any respect for women. And it trapped my worldview into this really negative, dark one. It's really stunted my growth. You know, I'm happy to be out of it in the expansive ways that I'm able to think now. It's a very liberating thing on a spiritual level.
Did you have any sort of singular epiphany, or did it come to you in stages?
You know, okay, I will say I have a brother who is like a feminist, and like was at the time, and obviously was put off by the fact that I was in the manosphere. But he did work on my heart like a lot. And so there would, like, when I would say something particularly egregious, he would like be, so I would say it was several instances, but I remember most of those instances pretty well, where he would just be like, hey, like, you and I, like, we need to talk. Like, this was not like what your view here is, like, really wrong. And then at the same time, kind of learning also to be like, hey, there's nothing wrong with banging people in the bathroom, people. They're just not for you, you know. Right? It's just not what you're seeking out of life, you know. And so it's just like, oh yeah, that's right. They're living their own thing, and I'm doing my own thing, and it's okay. How about you? Any singular moment? Or?
No singular moment, but I, at the time, I was super debate bro, confrontational, totally different than how I am today. No, I didn't drop that. But you know, very, very, very confrontational. So I would deliberately join feminist groups so that I could argue with them. And I got the attention of several feminists who, rather than treating me like an asshole that I was, they just calmly spoke to me over and over and over and over and over again. And I would blow them off. I'd be hateful. Very similar to that, how my stories with Mike Shipley, for instance, that I told you about before. You know, like with him.
I've reconnected with him, by the way. We are not friends again, but I am not blocked, and we're working through that. But yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah. But yeah, no, these feminists, they just repeatedly spoke to me as though I was a human being, even though I was being an asshole to them. And there's no one singular moment that I can point to. It's like, this is the point at which I changed, but like repeated exposure therapy to the fact that the caricatures I've had of feminism were not based in reality. Like, I mean, they're individuals, right, as you said, the Dworkin types and the J.K. Rowling types and everything like that. Yes. They're, you know, asshole feminists. But, you know, like the majority of people are just trying to live their life, and they're trying to end discrimination. And yeah, I mean,
good thing.
I was like slowly realized that everything that I had, like the structure I had built was just not ingrained with reality. And like, there are individual aspects that I had right, but my solutions were completely wrong.
Yeah. It's amazing how like that much charity that you don't deserve, still firmly pushing back on it. I know for me, a big one was I got tired of being like wrong. I remember once, and this isn't about my manosphere thing, but this is kind of my shift from being a Republican to kind of being more centered. Again, Love First Christians, we welcome Republicans, Democrats, whoever. This is just me sharing a personal story. But I remember I shared a story from InfoWars. I didn't know like Alex Jones or anything like that, but it was a story of these climate protesters that blocked the road and somebody died in the ambulance. Whole thing, complete fabrication, made up by Alex Jones to make them look stupid. I still don't like the blocking the road thing. I know you and I have maybe differences there, and that's fine. But like, the idea was I hate the fact that I shared a lie made me go, okay, that's bad. Why am I believing this lie? Why did I fall for this? I hated looking stupid in public, right? You look at like the Jubilee videos and you get like the Charlie Kirk and the Fresh and Fit guys looking like totally stupid when they get confronted with anybody outside of their little group. When you're in your little group, you feel so safe and secure, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Out of that group, not so much, you know, and then all of a sudden that false information doesn't fly. And the thing is I did pride myself in being a truth seeker. I considered myself a truth seeker. And I wasn't aware of how many people I was surrounded by that were only LARPing as truth seekers, that were only pretending to care about the truth in so much as it benefited their point of view. I thought my point of view was just the inconvenient truth. And truth is, it was inconvenient, but it was not the truth.
Yeah.
And you and I know what it's like to be trapped in kind of this slave cycle. This is the human experience. One of the reasons I love the term Redeemer for Christ is because it is progressive. And I'm not talking about the political sense. I'm talking about the grammatical sense. He is still doing the redeeming. We as human beings, as long as we are on this earth, are in a constant state of falling for sin. It will not stop happening. It's just by virtue of being here and being human that we're going to make mistakes. We can be made into new creations. The instant we become sinless, God ascends us up into heaven. Since we're not sinless, we're here. And so that means that we will still struggle with sin from now until forever. And this is why we are grateful to have not just somebody who redeemed us, past tense, but a redeemer who is currently redeeming us, who says, I'm going to get you out of that slave cycle. Any other notes on the slave cycle before we move on to the ransom part of this?
No, I don't think I have anything else.
Okay. So ransom we are used to referring to as like a king's ransom. I kidnap a king, I hold them for ransom, I get some money for it. But this was a common term to use for a slave. And I shouldn't say common, this was the term that you used for the slave. You would say, what is their debt to get them free? That's the ransom. And that ransom would be, a certain amount of money, and then they could, they would be out of their labor to you. Back in the days when slavery was more acceptable in the aughts, and I'm not talking about the 2000s, I'm talking about year zero, where we had more slaves in the BCs.
Can I jump in for just a second?
Aside from the prison system today, in which case we still have more slavery than ever before. But go ahead.
What was the how did the ransom that you're speaking about interact with Jubilee and things like that? Is this for like out of cycle Jubilee?
Yeah. So the concept of the Redeemer and the ransom is a concept that transcended more than Judaism. So Jews specifically set an end date for how long you could keep a slave for. So that ransom, in addition to the money, actually had a date on it. Right, you could never hold more than, I believe it was 7 years. The number differed, but more than 7 years over a person's life, no matter how much debt they owed you, or whatever grievous offense that you felt. Obviously there were different penalties that weren't just slavery, of course. Yeah. But whatever the debt was forgiven every 7 years on Jubilee, and you were never able to extend that past those 7 years. Funny that I've mentioned the term Jubilee in two different contexts. But it just comes up that way. So the Jews had a specific concept that evaded the ransom, which is actually kind of a premonition of Christ, right? Like that there is a time limit to these things that the Jews accepted that most of the society did not accept. That most said there's a ransom, it must be paid, who will pay it, and the Jews kind of said sure, we do want it paid, but there's a time limit. We're not going to make you a slave for life. I hope that answers the question that you're going to.
Yeah. So we're talking about other nations besides just Israel.
Yeah, and Israel had the ransom too. You could pay it and be done early, right? You weren't just a slave for 7 years. In fact, most often people weren't liberated by Jubilee. Most often the penalty was like, I stole a horse from you. I work from you to pay off the horse. The horse is paid off. I did 1 week's worth of work or whatever, and it's over, right? Like it's done. So and so that is the ransom debt, like whatever it was, like that ransom debt. The trouble that we have here as fallen human beings is we are told that sin, that debt is insurmountable by ourselves, right? Like we will never. And I find this to be so true on a very practical level. And I'll give you a really good example. This was an old Cato Institute podcast I heard from a while ago. But willpower is actually a matter of energy more than it is like strength of will or belief. Now, obviously, you have to choose to use your willpower. I'm a firm believer in agency. I'm not going to get. I mean, I would love to get into free will. Oh my gosh, I would love like a conversation about free will, but we'll get into that later. Agency or whatever we want to call it. I believe firmly in agency, but like there's a reason that if you're trying to quit smoking, it's a lot easier in the morning than it is at night, and that's just because that's a product of energy. So ultimately, you will get worn down. There was a study that showed that the people who knew they were most susceptible to being seduced took the precautions, took the energy, did what they did so that they wouldn't be seduced. The people who most felt they were immune to seduction were the most likely to be seduced because they didn't take precautions. They just felt that their strength of will would get them through it. Right. And so what we have to recognize and it depends, what is that seduction in your life? You know, what is the thing that calls to you? We all have it. And we all take these precautions against it. But you're never free from it. There's no point where me, Hody Johns, is just going to be like, sex? Pfft, I don't care about that. Right? There's no point when
I'm a monk.
Right, exactly. I'm a monk, right. Unless I hit level 20 in my D&D campaign, I am not going to be immune to that as far as will goes. And there are things that we can do to build these things up in addition to energy, but most of that involves, like, even when you take these programs, what do they say? Eat right, sleep well, you know? Pizza will never not be tempting for me. A cheese stuffed crust pizza especially will never not be tempting to me. Like, that is among the highest of my temptations. Like, and it's just by virtue of being human. Now, I may wake up and constantly defeat that thing, but ultimately that sin is baked into me. And I'm not saying eating cheese stuffed crust pizza is a sin. The way I eat it is a sin. I eat it gluttonously. I do not eat it with the mind of God. I guess I'll say that. But as we went in, I mean, heck, we even went in Romans that for some people, some eating styles are a sin, and for some people it's not. And to each their own, and let's not judge each other. But you know, for me, gluttony is like there. Now I'm able to get a handle on it, right? I'm actually on this diet right now. I'm down about, well, I was up to 268. I'm down to 231. I'm happy to share my progress with everybody because I'm proud of it.
Right.
You know, and I feel good about it. That being said, every day I wake up, the urge to overeat is present with me, right? Like I want to. And similarly, these are the sins in your life. I think one of the most unhealthy Christian recommendations we give to people is when they're trying to defeat something like pornography or something in their lives. And we just tell them, oh, you know, you just got to want it more. You know, you just got to like need it more. These aren't practical things. That's not the way the mind works. You know, there is a way to get over it, but it's not by just like trying harder. Wanting it better. Like there are tactics and techniques that help you get over these things, and you have to embrace those things if you're going to do it. But it's always a temptation. Anyway, I've talked for a lot, but any thoughts about?
Well, no, it's like, and as you're saying, the techniques are probably going to be things like removing the temptation loci, or or whatever. The things that are most likely to get you to fall into that thing. If it's porn or something like that, removing those bookmarks from your browser, or whatever, that removing the collection, having accountability. If it's pizza, stop shopping in that aisle.
Right. I know which aisle has the donuts on the end.
Yeah.
And those are always like, if you don't take any, like you owe us an extra 50 cents. They're always so cheap. And they taste amazing, and there's a dozen of them. I'm just like, you just got to go around it, you just got to figure out a way. And the thing is I am saying this now, knowing that I will have a day when I fail this diet. Like it's built in. They call them cheat days. For me, it's not cheating so much as if I plan them in there. I'm having Thanksgiving dinner. I'm having Christmas dinner. That's life. Like it's just gonna happen. Anyway, that's all getting sidetracked, but you are correct. Like there is a way to like avoid these that are like actual real plans, real. I found that one of the most amazing things, especially with something, it's weird that I've talked about sex so much on our redemption one, but when we talk about pornography, that I saw this study that was like togetherness, like community is like the number one way to kick this thing. Like not having somebody that holds you accountable, but also doesn't like judge you. like somebody who like sees your browser like information, shares it with you, talks about their own struggles and their own failures, and that like fighting through it together with somebody is tremendously helpful as opposed to trying to fight it in isolation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not only having somebody to keep you accountable, but also just like, as you said, the community aspect of it, the isolation is what gets you the tempted, because it's with porn, for instance, there's no shame when you're by yourself and everything like that. Whereas when you're interpersonal and you're acting with other people, you have that reservedness, and that also that sense of community. You have togetherness as well that keeps you out of those temptations. Yeah.
Yeah, and let's talk about the ultimate togetherness now. Like that's Jesus, right? Always with us, always present, always accessible, always willing to help, always understanding of our failures. He took upon himself all those sins in a very real sense, and knows what it's like to fail. Even though he didn't fail himself, he has your knowledge to fail, right?
Yeah.
Like he felt that, feels the temptation, understands you better than you could possibly know. I mean, we're told in the Bible that God gave laws because like that weren't right, but because men's hearts were too hard. Like God understood, he's not giving you this standard you can't hit. You know, the reason he gives us this Holy Spirit is there were even more standards he has to tell us, but couldn't fit them all in his own ministry, right? Like there's so much more, right? And so we've got this gift, we've got this Holy Spirit to help us defeat these things on this earth. But like I said, because we're mortal, because we're human, we will fail. However, redemption is closely linked in the Bible to defeating of death. And this is a big part of it, right? Because we are condemned, not just spiritual death, but I'm talking about the actual death. We will die. We are people, we are mortals, and perishment will happen. Even if we invent a way to live forever, eventually, just laws of what's it, Murphy's Law, something's going to happen to you, right? You will die. Either an asteroid will fall on your head at some point, right? Even if you live 1,000,000 years. This is the mortal experience. This is it. And Christ's redemption over death brings us back to life. And when he brings us back to life, we are able to overcome those temptations that we once had before. Now, instead of having that daily struggle, we just say, well, I don't even want to do that anymore, right? That's the process. We won't ever know that in this life because it happens after death. That's the redemption. We die, then we get raised, right? So I think a lot of people know this is why he is a redeemer, this progressive future tense, as opposed to the guy who redeemed me once. It's not this is baptism's good, fine, right? Great introduction. Wash away all the old sins. You're going to commit some new ones. It's the human experience, that let's not create this expectation that you never will sin again. And so that process will happen later on. The temptation will be removed. Never again will they put donuts on the end of the aisle. Never again will I have to worry about, some girl shaking it and flirting with me or whatever. That will just be removed. And not only that, the temptation will be removed. What's removed is my ability to fall for it, right? Mentally, all of a sudden, because if you think about it in a practical sense, I've talked about how the energy matters so much of it, right? The willpower, how much energy I have. Well, when we are no longer bound by human energy and we have infinite energy, we get infinite willpower. It just makes sense on a very scientific way. So this is kind of when we talk about the redeeming process. Now let's talk about the ransom a little bit. So that ransom is referred to as Christ's sacrifice, oftentimes on the cross for us. That this was the payment. We saw this echoed when we were supposed to sacrifice animals, innocent creatures, to pay a blood sacrifice for what sins we had committed. This was a personal sacrifice for us. Animals have a great deal of value, right? In these societies, still do in our current society. The death of the loss of one is a real loss, and we feel this sense of loss, and it was made manifest before us during this process. We no longer have to continue that process because the most perfect of us, the most perfect lamb we could ever offer, was sacrificed. And with that sacrifice, we all have access to that. That is the ransom. That is the payment. We all have access to it now. And that ransom has been paid. We're told that was paid even while we were still in sin, right? Even while we were still messing up. Jesus was like, hey, I got you covered, even for what you're currently doing.
Right.
That's big, right? When we talk about redemption, it's one thing to say, I need the coupon, right? Where is it? I can't find it in my purse. And it's another thing when the store just says, hey, just show up and I'll give you the free thing. You don't like, don't worry about the coupon. You know, it's done. By virtue of you walking in here, boom, coupon's had. Even better, Christ is going to go one step further, and he's just going to mail you the thing. You didn't even have to show up to the store. The package is there. It's in your door.
Provide your address.
Right. He got your address. He does the creepy Santa Claus thing. He knows where you live, knows when you're sleeping and awake. Got you the Amazon package right on time, and it's theirs to open, right? Like it is that type of a redemption. He wants you to have it. You look at the Sistine Chapel, right? And God's finger being outstretched. He desperately wants you to have this gift. And he was eager to give it. We look at God's eagerness with which to give this redemption. And it's funny because we look at it and we oftentimes preach this with a lot of guilt. And this is kind of the one aspect of redemption that I don't care to harp on too much, because let's face it, as Christians, we're good at guilting people. We feel that that's an effective process. I know, Aaron, you have similar feelings to me about how that works, and guilting people into believing, or you killed Jesus and you should feel bad about it, right?
Yeah, I'm actually eager for you to elaborate, because I'm not 100% following you on that one.
Oh yeah, at least in the churches I've been to, there's some element of like, when somebody says Jesus died for you, man, I don't want anybody to die for me. Tell me my kid died for me. My mom died for me. If somebody jumps in front of you and when somebody's shooting at you and they die instead of you live. You see this in psychology, guilt. Right? You survivor's guilt. You're like, why them and not me? It should have been me. And the Bible iterates, yes, it should have been you. You know, you were dead to me in this world. But the thing is, let's be honest here. Jesus put you in this world. He knew you were going into a system of failure, a system of temptation that you could never truly overcome, right? Like, this was the plan. The plan was to send his son. He chose this path. So there's no real sense in feeling guilty about it. This was the plan he wanted. If anything, we should rejoice about it. In fact, redeeming is met with an idea of joy within the church as opposed to one of guilt. When we look at the primitive church and the attitudes they have about it, I'll use it again. There's jubilee, there's jubilation, there's happiness, there's joy. You know, there's a sense of levity and happiness when they talk about this redemption. You hear Christian churches today, and it's a sense of darkness, a sense of sorrow, a sense of loss, a sense of that guilt, your fault. You know, these were your faults, literally. And Jesus died for you, didn't deserve to. And I guess that means you get a second chance now, you little imperfect worm. It's not the attitude that they had about it then. It's not the attitude we should have about it now.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that to me, the guilt thing is just a little, I don't like that. Jesus wanted you to have this. Think about this. If we're going to make this corporate, like I did before, like they're sending you the package, they want you to have it. They want you to have it. They're willing to cover the cost. And it's like, how down am I going to get if they're like, oh, but somebody paid for the cost of the shipping and really I should have paid for that? Well, they chose to do it. Jesus chose to do it. You didn't choose to do it. He chose to do it, right? He chose to pay the packaging to send you this thing that he really wants you to have. I don't feel bad at that point for opening the box. I feel grateful. I feel thankful for what's in the box. I'm glad somebody paid the shipping cost, but I'm not going to live my life like being like, oh, the cost of the package was so much. That was their choice, right? Like nobody feels bad for Publishers Clearinghouse when they give you that huge check, right? Like nobody's like, oh, but the person didn't earn that check. It was just a lottery. It was just, oh my, like there's no sense in that. And there's just as much sense in experiencing any guilt about getting Christ's redemption nowadays. Anything to add about guilt? I guess you and I just recognize.
It took me a moment to even understand what you were talking about because it's such an alien concept to me. Because
as it should be.
It's for the exact reasons as you said. Jesus set this whole scenario up in the first place. So why on earth would I feel guilty over something that he designed? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. But as you explained it, I was like, oh yeah, okay, I do remember the church doing that, because there's a lot of things wrong with the church. So
yeah. I mean, to go back to what we were talking about first, guilt cycles, right? This is part of the slave cycle. The guilt is a huge part of these cycles. You want to kick porn, people try to guilt themselves out of it, doesn't work, will not work. Guilt themselves out of, be like, I feel bad. I mean, how many people do you see like cheating chronically, and they're like, I feel bad about it, but I don't know how to stop it, I don't know what to do. Yeah, it's the guilt thing doesn't work. You need something else. So yeah, this ransom package, I love the idea of Christ paying this ransom, because we think of a king's ransom. It's a lot of money, right? It's a lot of dough. It's a lot of whatever, right? No matter how deep your sins are, God's going to pay it off, right? No matter what mistakes or whatever you have made or are going to make, Jesus is going to be like, I'll pay for it. I got it covered, right? We don't want to ever intentionally make this debt any deeper. But that being said, his mercy and love, they're limitless. His ability to redeem is limitless. His bank account is limitless. I mean, again, I'm going to be pretty capitalist about this. If we're paying a ransom and the guy says $1 million and Jesus is sitting on infinity dollars, giving out $1 million, infinity minus $1 million is infinity, right? Like it's we're dealing with a concept where it's just like, there's no, there is no limit, all you Mean Girls fans, there you go. No limit. And so, whatever the value is, you're able to be redeemed, and it's worth it to him. I love this idea of how it's preached in the Bible about the value of you is worth it to him. His eagerness for it, his love for it. He's happy to pay it off for you, right? He doesn't want you chained to that cycle anymore. The debt isn't owed to God, by the way. It's owed to Satan. God doesn't want you in debt to Satan. God doesn't want you trapped in these cycles, right? Like, this directly benefits God. You get a room in his kingdom, and he wants you to come live with him. He likes you. Even while you were still in sin, God likes you and loves you. He made you, right? Like, he wants you there. So this paying of the ransom is something he's like, sure, name your price, done deal. Let's make it happen. And he doesn't want you trapped in that slave cycle. Like, I think, to me, like, we so often just think of it as like we've aggrieved, and we do when we sin, it is egregious to God, but more so than that, it's egregious to him because even let's use the Old Testament terminology. It's cheating on him with Satan, right? And he would love for you to reaffirm and just say, like, I don't want to have that Satan relationship anymore. Great. He wants the relationship with you. He's willing to pay off whatever debts you may have incurred when you were with that Satan, when you cheated with Satan. And he'll write the check and just say, welcome back. I'm glad to have you here. And it's a current process. Like, I mean, people like you and I sin every day. I don't want to speak for you. I sin multiple times a day. It's too difficult not to. Right. But I was called to be in the world. Now, not of the world. And when I sin, I fall into those traps of being of the world. I admit it. I do it. Right. But God would rather I have that struggle than leave the world, than just withdraw. Right. It's easy to sin if you never sin, if you just lock yourself in the closet and starve yourself to death. Right. You will never sin again. Nothing you could do. Right. You'll live a life of no sin. That's not the plan. God planned for sin. He planned to pay off the debt for that sin. And that is all done, all wrapped up. One of the coolest things that we should preach more as Christians to non-Christians is that they are redeemed. They have been redeemed. The package is already there. It's just up to them if to open or not. But the redemption process already happened. The shipping got paid for and the product got sent. It's there. The redemption part already happened. You already have been redeemed. It's just a matter of you accepting it. And I think that that's great, as opposed to, don't you want to be redeemed? It's, you've been redeemed. Let me show you how. And latching onto a redemption that's already there is much better than latching onto a redemption that you have to earn, or something that is, hopefully you'll get. Because some of us, our sins are too egregious. I think if we look at the Old Testament and the prices they had to pay for their sins, we'd run out of animals. I mean, me myself, I would run out of animals.
Yeah.
You know, if they're like every time you look
I don't have
lustfully at a
enough
woman,
to afford this habit.
Right, exactly. There's no more doves anymore. They're extinct. You know, I killed them. I'm sorry. Like the lamb's way gone. You know, like I sin too much for this to happen. And I mean, even when we read the book of Job, right? Like this is ultimately the message was the people kept trying to find like what was your sin that led to these bad things happening to you. And God's like, dude, that's not why it happened, right? Let's not stop looking at it like that, right? This isn't how it goes. And we get a lot of foreshadowing of Christ within the book of Job. And so, and this is part of that, right? This redemption process. And I would say the process, like I guess I'm calling it a process, the process that already occurred, and us taking advantage of that, of what already occurred, that redemption. I'm going to break it down to some more human things in a sec, but any other thoughts on like spiritual redemption, Aaron, before I...
No, actually, I'm surprised that you had led with, I mean, I shouldn't have been surprised. This is obviously the primary use of the word redemption, but I guess I was kind of expecting it to be more interpersonal. And I guess it ties into the concepts of forgiveness and stuff like that we've talked about before. You know, those concepts kind of go hand in hand with one another. But that's what I was kind of expecting we were going to be discussing more than spiritual redemption, which I should have probably expected that, considering that's the main use of the word.
That's all right. Like, and like, let's talk about human redemption, because ultimately this word, while spiritual, it's taking a very human thing and trying to get this to use that term to understand a biblical or I don't want to say biblical, understand a divine concept, right? Like it's using something that exists. And we've seen this over and over before. Job, Genesis use Canaanite stories. The story of Gilgamesh, right, in Exodus God uses existing stories to kind of try to help you get insight into who he is, right? Like, I mean, we look at parables. The rest of the Bible is no much different than Jesus teaching parables. You know, he's just using stories that you understand and making and understanding that concept in a biblical sense. So really, if we're to understand the concept of redemption spiritually, it does make sense what you're talking about. Maybe I should have started with this to understand it in a mortal sense. And I guess I did start with that by saying about how it started off with, you know, slavery and ransoms and all that. Yeah. But we can talk about like current day redemption and what it means to redeem yourself in the eyes of somebody else, or when we go out seeking redemption.
Well, like, I mean, the prototypical example of what our criminal justice system is supposed to do, rehabilitation. That's a redemption of sorts. Obviously, our criminal justice system is incredibly flawed, but the idea of it, the prototypical ideal of our criminal justice system is supposed to be centered around redemption.
What's it? Oh, it's the 3 R's of political of criminal justice philosophy. It's revenge. Oh, revenge, retribution, or redemption, right? Like, I think
I haven't heard this one before.
Yeah, I don't know, it's some basic, like, it's one of those like law school 101 like thing. It's stupid. It's dumb. but redemption is one of those concepts that, like, are we doing it for the criminal to be redeemed? Are we doing it for the victim so that they can be recompensated, you know, the retribution route? Or are we doing it for revenge? You've harmed one, so you will come under harm. And those are kind of the 3 concepts that go around with the idea, the general idea as far as criminal justice goes. I'm completely with you. It should be redemption focused. I
would you say that, like, in the criminal justice system, the ideal rehabilitation is redemption? Like, they're almost identical. They're synonyms.
Rehabilitation was the other R. Damn it. I knew I was missing one of them. Yeah. Sorry. What was the question?
Well, I mean, just the in the criminal justice sense, the words rehabilitation and redemption are kind of synonymous.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, similar. little different. So rehabilitation, if you think of it, look at the word habitat in the word rehabilitation. You're teaching them to, like, the habitat of humanity, right? Like, we are all human beings. If you've done something egregious, like let's just say you stole somebody's car, you're no longer fit to be part of that habitat, right? Like, you're not going to get along with other humans. So rehabilitation, rehabitating them, is to get them to fit in back with humanity. It's a process to being like, oh, now that I'm out of prison, oh, I can see why stealing that car was wrong. I should have never done it, and I will never do it again. Redemption is a little different in the sense that it's just, I guess it's a little less than rehabilitation in the sense that it's just trying to say, I'm not holding your sins against you anymore. And I think it's kind of I don't even say less. It's the first step of kind of a rehabilitation.
Okay.
Because I think
I can get behind you on this.
Holding somebody's sins over their head. Let's talk about this, especially in the criminal justice sense. I think there's no, I'm gonna try to get away from spirituality as much as I can here, but there's just no way to do it. If I steal a car from you, even if I give you that car back, right? Like, it's back, I can't replace time. You know, you were without the car for 12 hours. You know, you don't have I can't give you another 12 hours on this earth with a car. You know, those are 12 hours you've spent without a car. More importantly, I'm never going to give you back a sense of security. People deserve a sense of security, right? Like, when you feel robbed, even when people are like, I mean, somebody breaks into my car, they stole my change jar. Congratulations on your $8 or whatever. But like, that sense, like, what more is upsetting to me is like that sense of just being like, oh my gosh, somebody's been in here. Somebody would be stealing my stuff. Like that's hurtful to me. And nobody's getting that back, right? Like, well, let's look at, like, man, I'll make it egregious. I'm not afraid to say it, but let's just look at something like sexual assault. I'm not giving anybody anything back. There's no way. There's not a monetary way to give it back. I mean, the state tries. They're like, here, have. Look at the Alex Jones thing, right? Like, he harassed those people, directed people to harass them based on something that he knew was a lie. And like, the state's like, I don't know, $1 billion, right? Well, that's not giving them their time back. That's not giving them their lives back. The problem is they're being harassed daily. They have to, like, change their names and move states. And like, they've gotten fired from jobs because of this, like what you did to them. You know, like, the monetary thing doesn't make any sense. So I think redemption is kind of the starting point of all this, to just say, you're not going to pay this debt back. Even if it's simple as, I stole $100 and here's the $100 back. I'll pay it back plus interest. Here's $105 back. You're still not ever going to give that person back a sense of security. You're not giving them back, you know, what's really been robbed from them, especially, you know, to bring it back to it on a spiritual sense. You're not giving them, you're not going to create wholeness in them ever. They've got their own path. I believe that their restitution process, while it may be tied into this rehabilitation process, is separate. I don't want no amount of punishing the criminal who sexually assaults somebody is going to make the other person any less sexually assaulted. The healing for that person cannot come through punishment of the perpetrator. It must come through something else. Most people who have been sexually assaulted, the sexual assailants get away with it. It's one of the most difficult things to prove ever happened, right?
I think it's like 75% get away with it or something like that.
And that's of the ones that we like try, right? Like, that's the ones beyond the ones where women go, oh, there's no way, right? Like, this will turn into he said, she said. Everybody sees it right off the bat. Yep, he said, she said, no chance. And I'm sorry, I don't want to make this just women. That's wrong of me.
Right.
You know, men, women, children, you know, whoever has been sexually assaulted. And it's wrong, right? Like, and we just say, like, hey, I can't give you that back simply by punishment of the criminal. You look at people, psychologically, what happens to them after they show up, say a family member was murdered, and they show up to the victim's execution expecting like some kind of carnival, and they don't leave with any amount of healing. Eliminating that person's life doesn't bring your loved one back. It doesn't give you anything. If it gives you a sense of justice, it's a very perverse sense of justice. It's the revenge sense. This isn't God's justice. In fact, we're examining God's justice right now, and there's a lot of letting you off the hook for stuff like this, right? So that healing process, I believe, needs to be separate. Now, I do believe that somebody who has been redeemed and is being rehabilitation will, of their own accord, want to make it up to the person that they've agreed. I think that's one of the top things we want to do. When I say I want to stop cheating on my wife, okay, first thing, obviously, I'm going to stop cheating. But next thing, I got to figure out how to rebuild those bridges, rebuild that trust with it, right? Like figure that out. I think there's something great about a criminal who goes like, man, I murdered your family member. I feel awful about it. I wish I could take it back for anything in the world. I messed up. What can I do? And for the family to just be like, live your life. Like, don't worry about us anymore. You look at your own process. But if they do want something from them, like help them, like, hey, listen, I'm here. If you want me to explain why, I will. I'll do my best. I'm sorry. I'll give you whatever I can to make it up to you. But there's no amount that's going to replace that person, no quantity, right? This is why the ransom, in a spiritual sense, there's no actual practical dollar amount on this. These sins, you don't make up for a sin, really. If I lie to you, Aaron, I kind of break your trust, right? Like, you may learn to forgive me, of course, but you're never going to have the same relationship with me again, probably, depending on the nature of it. Maybe we will. I don't even want to say that, because I do think there is a human aspect, but where we go, all is forgiven, roads are paved, and we're going forward. So actually, I don't want to say that. But for a while there's going to be new boundaries that we need to have and new difficulties. I might not just write you off forever. I mean, this goes into, heck, we talked about Mike, right? This goes between like what happened with me and Mike. And it's like, do I say that like this one thing, which was bad, is now who you are forever? That's not right. And actually I really deprive myself of the good things Mike offers when I do, when I have some kind of standard like this, and I don't want to get too much into my personal beefs with like me and him that we've had. But like, it's stuff like that where I just say like, I mean, everybody's kids lie to them, right? If you have a kid, you've been lied to. Congratulations. There it is. Can you ever have the same relationship with your kid? Well, I mean,
absolutely.
Right, of course, right? Like, sure, right? We still help the kids go through a redemption process. We still help them go through a rehabilitation process.
It's like, easier for me right now because my kiddos are 5 and 1. So I'm to the extent right now that the lying is also low grade and childish, literally. That it's very low stakes.
It's almost cute, right? Like they I mean, heck, there was like a year where like they went viral, like people just being like, watch my kid tell like a stupid lie, like, did you get into the markers? And they've got all over the face, and they're like, no, no, it's kind of cute even, right?
Okay, no, on this exact example, because I want to give this, because it's very funny.
Do it.
Okay, so there are 2 lines that are almost entirely parallel and horizontal on the wall in my mother-in-law's room, and they're drawn about 2 feet above the floor. And my baby daughter, who's 1, she can't even hold a marker steady to draw something like that. And I'm in that room with my 5-year-old, and I'm like, can you tell me who drew these lines on the wall? And she's like, Ashlyn did it. And I'm like, Ashlyn did it, huh? She couldn't hardly even reach up there, much less draw a straight line all the way across the wall. She's like, Ashlyn did it. I'm like, really?
Yeah. I bet. Yeah. Yeah, it's just so it's like, what's that in your hand, right? He had something he wasn't supposed to have. And he put his hands behind his back, and he's like, nothing. Like, let's see your hands. And he shows one. And they're like, show me your other hand. And he sets it down on the floor. And then like, he did it. He got away with it. There it is. Like, and of course, like, you got to set him right. Like, you do as a parent. You'd be like, hey, this is why we don't lie or whatever. But, and it's almost in this cute way that probably God views our lies, right? Like, oh, that's very cute. You think you're getting away with this. Like, but let's still put you on the right path. Like, God's still a good parent, right? Let's learn the lesson we have to learn. And let's move on. And as you said, you can have the same relationship with your kids afterwards. So sorry about what I said earlier. Of course, you can have this redemptive process. Depending on the degree of the vice, it may change your relationship with somebody, and maybe forever. And maybe there is no making up for that relationship. But this ransom process and the concept of redemption, it's wrong to think about this redemption price as restitution for the person who hurt you. Now, this is a very earthly concept of this, that we say, I stole somebody's horse. I have to work off the money for like the horse plus, whatever else, and then pay that.
Yeah.
That's the ransom, right? That's a ransom. Yet another R in criminal justice. There we go. Ransom.
Well, no, it's actually funny because I just, not even 20 minutes ago, I'm calling them synonyms. But as you're talking through this with me, I'm seeing more and more how rehabilitation requires penance, and it requires making like restitution. You're making the person whole. Otherwise, how can you be rehabilitated? Like, again, I'm talking about platonic ideals of rehabilitation, not what we actually have in real life. But redemption, there's no strings attached. Like God doesn't, beyond acknowledgement and asking for forgiveness, there's no strings attached. You don't have to, beyond like the Catholic vision of like saying Hail Marys and stuff like that. I mean, there's no do 500 laps for the coach as an apology or whatever.
The recognition that you screwed up is enough. This is that it's just you opening the package that was sent to your house, right? You say, I screwed up. I'm not enough, messed up. I'm going to take advantage of this redemption, and that's good. Yeah. It's, and with that, there's no possible way to just, like I said, there's just no possible way to completely restore somebody that you've harmed. In spiritual ways, even more so than these physical ways we're talking about. I mean, when you lie to somebody, cheat on somebody, I mean, I can't give my wife $1 million unless I'm like Kobe Bryant's wife or something and expect her to forgive my cheating. And even then, let's be honest, that doesn't make the cheating go away. That's just, that's maybe part of the price of you trying to make it up for it. I have no doubt that if you try to make up for your cheating, that it will involve some monetary, not just writing a check to them, but you're going to have to show them with your work, and work often translates to money in this modern era, that you are sorry about what you did, and this is part of it. But you're never going to fully restore that just with a price, just with money. There is a spiritual price that has to be reckoned with here. And so when we do redemption, and I say this, even bringing it back to the human sense, that there is still, I'm not, because I know you asked for that. So like, this is what I'm talking about. When you cheat on your wife, there is more than just saying, oh yeah, you cheat on your wife and it's $1,000. That's just a price, right? That's just a fee. If that's the way we break it down, then being rich makes it so you get to sin a lot more, right? These are indulgences all over again.
Yeah.
As opposed to like actual redemption, which is like trying your best to make it up to them, right? This is their redemption, right? Like to make it up to them as much as you can. And you're not making it up to them. You're making it up to yourself, because actually that's something I want to put a pin in, because I plan on talking about Red Dead Redemption in a moment, since we've already talked about video games. But yeah, any other thoughts on that, Aaron?
No, now you got me thinking about Red Dead Redemption.
Cool. So one of the most notable stories in Red Dead Redemption 2 is the redemption of Arthur Morgan. This is a guy who, if you play the video game, has killed thousands of innocent people. If we are to try and be realistic about like the Old West days, let's just say a lot of innocent people in the course of robbing trains, robbing banks, trying to stay afloat. I think the beauty of the game is you see it through his eyes, that he was never taught to value these lives. He was caught at a very young age by a very manipulative, hyper manipulative narcissist that tries to give him a sense of that fatherly figure, but does so in a very self-serving way and makes it so that it's like, you are serving me now. Now, Arthur's crimes are, I mean, I don't want to say unforgivable, because we're over here on a Christian podcast and there's only one unforgivable sin. I know what it is, but borderline unforgivable when you're murdering just tons of, he clears out of town at one point, right? Like he just everybody dead, and all this over because he like just keeps robbing trains for a gang that is likes to pretend they have a lot of heart, but ultimately that heart is fake, phony, and shows itself to be phony.
Can I bust in
Yeah.
for a second to talk
Yeah.
about? Okay, so I want to ask a question about this. As somebody who played Red Dead Redemption but never got out of Chapter 2,
Okay.
I kind of bounced off the game because I just, like, I got quite a bit into the Chapter 2, and I was just like, yeah, I'm not feeling it anymore. I'm thinking like 30 hours in or something like that.
Okay.
If you're talking about just 3 characters, you're talking about Dutch, Arthur, and Hosea. What is Hosea's role in their relationship? Because at the point that I was in Chapter 2, Hosea seemed almost like the good version of Dutch.
Yeah.
Like he had Arthur almost had 2 father figures, and it's the devil on his shoulder and the angel on his shoulder. And I think I'm playing it up a little too much on Hosea because he seemed more neutral than good. But like that's the impression that I ended up getting.
Yeah. So Dutch has blatantly a shoulder angel and a shoulder demon. And this is actually part of the kind of, as a writer myself, as a professional writer, I really love what they do with this. So Dutch has Hosea, and since you only got part of the way through Chapter 2, you're going to have no idea probably what I'm talking about, because this happens at the end of Chapter 2. You probably have never met Micah. Micah is the shoulder demon, but you probably know of him at least, right?
Yeah, no, I know I played that mission. So that's like midway through Chapter 2. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So, and maybe it's just towards the end for me because you get to decide the order, and I save. I keep Micah in prison for as long as I can.
Yeah,
that's a personal gamer choice right there.
I instantly regretted it the moment I played it out.
Right. Yeah, so Micah is supposed to be the practical one, Dutch. You know, he's supposed to be the guy who's grounded, trying to keep this gang in order. But Hosea is the one that's full of love and lightheartedness. And how can we do this prank where nobody gets killed and we just do a show, snap some fingers and let's rob people without killing people, or let's go hunting and develop some camaraderie or whatever. And so, yeah, he plays the role of Dutch's shoulder angel, and Micah plays the role of Dutch's shoulder devil. And boy, I don't want to spoil this for people, but it's obvious which one Dutch ends up choosing. But the idea is that we have Dutch, who is, the more you find about him, the more find out the reason he makes the choices he does and why he, just severely problematic person. There are lots of theories about the kind of like narcissist that Dutch is. People are like, is he also a sociopath? How much did he know when he knew it? Is this the story of also Dutch becoming evil? I actually rather think it is, although I would just say more evil because he's clearly had problems from the get-go. I'm doing a lot of video game analysis. I'm going to try to keep it on the redemption part as much as I can. But when we talk about the reason we get this redemption story from Arthur, now you can't make it up to all those people. So you just say, how can he possibly be redeemed? And there's this moment where he saves somebody getting out of the army, a deserter. This is later in the game where Arthur has decided to do good deeds because he's kind of starts seeing the flaws in Dutch and kind of says, oh my gosh, I've been a huge part of this, right? Now, the thing about Arthur is he's intentionally, and actually Hosea tries to get him intelligent, teach him to read, teach him to write. He's not very good at it, but like Hosea encourages these like think for yourself kind of examples. Whereas Dutch is the let me think for you kind of example, and Hosea, tries, but, loses ultimately. Well, actually, that's not true. Hosea has the last laugh here. Arthur does learn to think for himself. And when he does, he's kind of like, man, what we're doing here, we're not better than the other gangs. We pretend we are, but don't you think they pretend they're better than us? Right? Like, now here's the thing. By the time he has this redemption, this redemptive, I should say, not redemption, by the time he's had this redemptive thought, he's killed thousands of people. It's too late, right? Like, there's no possible way for him to be redeemed. But what's his redemption? He helps this guy desert. He sits next to this nun. And in the most powerful moment, I think, of the entire video game, he just looks at her and he's thinking about the afterlife for obvious reasons that weapons are closing in all around him. You know, you can tell from, I want to say chapter 4 on, this whole thing is doomed. And if you played Red Dead 1, you know that's not a spoiler, right? Like the point of Red Dead 2 is be like, how did this fall apart? How did this get doomed? And Arthur just looks around and says, we're all doomed, you know, knows it. He looks at her and just says, I'm afraid. And she just gives him this like, man, that fear should have nothing to do with you. I lived a nasty life in my past life too. Now, granted, she had no idea the type of stuff Arthur was. She thinks she does, right? But she's like, that's not the point. Like, make people happy, do good deeds, do what you can, right? The redemption is just doing whatever you can, and God will handle the rest. And Arthur's like, what can I do? Like, I'm never giving all these people back their husbands. But he finds one person who he widowed accidentally. Incident. Well, no. Well, he had a role in widowing her. Yeah. And is like, I'm going to pay for like all this money I've stolen. I should be giving it to this gang to do more bad deeds. I'm going to cover the cost of your house. I'm going to try to give you back something. And it's never enough, of course, right? Like her husband's dead because of him, largely, you know? So you go like, there's no full redemption for that, but he does his best. He helps John get out, right? Like as much as he can. He's like, all right, I want John to get out of this atmosphere. People shouldn't have to be stuck here. You know, it's beyond John. There's even people like Trelawney. And he's like, dude, get out while you still can. This thing's going to fall apart. And I don't want you here when it falls apart. Does everything he can, you know, and then it's over. And of course, if we were to examine, you and I, Aaron, from a historical perspective, Arthur Morgan, he would go down as one of the most evil characters in human history. And the fact that he tried to like pay for a prostitute's house and like he got one person out of the gang, I mean, that would come off as nothing, right? Like compared to the evils that he did. This is how God sees people, right? Like this is, and part of the problem that the nun sees in Arthur is that we make that standard of redemption impossible. It's too high. You can't ever achieve it.
And thus you don't even try.
Correct. How many of us will ever be able to pay back what our parents gave us? Those of us who had, I don't even say like super loving, but just normal parents, right? Yeah. That's a fee you're never going to pay back. And if you try to pay it back, you're going to go broke. You can't. The best you can do is pay it forward. Yeah. When we talk about redemption, we're talking about a payment. We're talking about a ransom. This is a payment. But the payment isn't necessarily to the victims. Sometimes there's nothing you can do to pay that. All you can do is pay it going forward. I have no idea the amount of people who I poisoned with my thoughts when I was stuck in the manosphere. I don't remember them. You know, I was really I'm still introverted. I was very thinking at the time. So I don't remember them. I'm not able to undo that damage, but what I can do is undo it for other people who I see on that same path.
Yeah.
Maybe as a major manosphere influencer, I will have poisoned hundreds more people than I ever bring back. I wasn't. Sorry, I'm creating a hypothetical here.
Yeah.
That's okay. I don't want you to say that it's ever too late or it's ever too high or your crime is ever too high, too bad, too invalid.
Well, and something that's not thought of is not only are you making that difference in a few people's lives by changing your course, but you're also no longer poisoning more people. You know, you're also adding in all of those hypothetical things that you could still be doing that you're choosing not to do.
Right?
Yeah.
And that ripple effect, like, have it go forward. You know, unfortunately, we know what happens in Red Dead 1, so it's a rather short ripple. But, you know, when we look at the Arthur's story, we can gain some inspiration by that and just say that, yes, like we never want to cough up 1,000 innocent people in order to learn a lesson. But let's face it, history is littered with lessons where thousands and millions of people die. You know, that's history. I don't want to learn that way, but it's how we learn. Like it's just part of it. Now, nobody wants to be the contributor of it. Nobody wants to be Pharaoh or Esau in these stories, right? Like, but there's a Pharaoh and there's an Esau. And God makes it clear that those people are part of the plan, you know, and that there should be redemption, even in the Bible, for Pharaoh and Esau, right? Like those two even get called out. and says like, yeah, they got their own redemption arcs, right? Like I created them to do a purpose. I got it. I understand why you dislike them, and you should dislike them, but they are worthy of redemption. They fulfilled the purpose. I am in control. Don't question my judgments. Everything is as it should be. Worry about your own redemption arcs. Like let me worry about theirs. Let them worry about theirs. And I just think it's a really powerful story because, man, and I feel like Christians a lot of times we sound like politicians or like we're interviewing for a job when we talk about like our weaknesses. I love too much. I care too much. And I occasionally have a blind spot when it comes to the poor because I just love them so much or something like that. Man, we're sinners. And let's come on, man. We hear about the wages of sin, right? Like the fruits. We see the fruits of the spirit, right? We know what the fruits of Satan are as well. They're nasty, right? And that's sin, right? Like it's not cute and adorable and funny to talk about all the time. Some sins are, as the ones we talked about. But like as sinners, we need to be more real with people. Like we commit real sins. Most men, I would say, struggle with lust a lot. I would say most people struggle with gluttony a lot. Sloth, laziness. Some people got drunkenness. The people most in denial about their drunkenness being a problem are the ones whose drunkenness creates the biggest problem from my experience. Like, we have real flaws as human beings, and we Christians are not above it. I mean, look at the stuff Paul is correcting in his epistles. Not simple, innocent behavior. Deal with people hiding funds, not wanting to disclose all their money. We commit financial infidelity. Commit regular infidelities. We just have all these real sins, and we need a real redemption for those real sins. And I think that that's the beauty of this concept of redemption, that God's got us covered. We should do what we can, get to part of this rehabilitation process, do everything we can in our power to make it up to people, but we're never going to make up for everything we stole. And to try and do that keeps us buried in the past. Trying to pay it back to your parents is going to keep you buried and in debt for the rest of your life. Pay it forward, right? That it helps you get out of that slave cycle and into that freedom cycle. Jesus has the ransom. He's got you covered. Was that a sin that you owed it to your parents? He's got it. He'll make up for that, right? Do what you can for him. Obviously, you and I talked last week. We don't want to cut the elderly out to dry or anything. We're not trying to leave them behind. Do what you can. Give them what's fair. Give them what's what you feel you can or is healthy. But you're never going to pay them back for everything they gave for you. Just don't try, man. That drain you, right? Like, do what you can with what you have. I think that's a pretty powerful part about redemption. Aaron, anything you want to talk about with redemption before we wrap things up?
No, I think we covered it.
All right. Cool. Well, I appreciate this. This was your suggestion. I appreciate that. It was a good one. I enjoyed my my studies into it. The more I looked at the like how it was used then and it being like a slave, the ransom.
Yeah, that was an interesting. I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah, it's funny because like I'm sure at one time I knew, but all these theological lessons come back as I relearn these things, and I look and I'm like, oh right. And so it's a cool process, and I think it's something that we should keep in mind when we talk about how we know our Redeemer lives, right? Like we say that as Christians, he conquered death so that we could also conquer death. And in that death process, yes, we will be redeemed, we'll be forgiven, we will no longer struggle with temptations that we struggle with today. And we can look forward to that. That's done. It's given to people who haven't even accepted it yet, right? Who have tried to refuse service, so they left the box on their doorstep. Fine, right? But it's there and it's paid. And I think it's such a wonderful idea because I do find that the love of money is the root of all evil. And that desire for us to treat all these sins like some kind of checkbook until we finally get everything's finally paid up and made up for, right? It's never going to be enough. And it's always going to be regressive. Whatever sins you've committed, you can tell the person you're sorry and make up to it as much as you can, but you'll never fully heal, right? Like from that, like we talked about before. Okay. But it's like that I don't want you to live in a feeling like, great, I've sinned so much I can't ever make up for it. God's going to make up for it, right? This is Jesus. And in a very real sense, when I talk about somebody who's experienced sexual assault, there's nothing you can give them back. But Christ is able to pay that for them, right? Christ is going to be like, hey, let me help you. If you've been sexually assaulted, man, please reach out to somebody, especially within the church and all the struggling that's happening there. But, regardless of wherever, whoever, however it happens, please reach out to somebody, because there's healing there for you. And that healing isn't going to come just from punishing the perpetrator. That healing has to come from God. It has to come from something else. It has to come from something else, not just punishing, getting revenge on that perpetrator. No amount of damage they endure is going to replace what was taken from you. And God says, yeah, we all commit sins like that. That you've told a lie that's so bad that's ruined a friendship. You've said something that's so hurtful that there's no redeeming it anymore. In earthly terms, right? When we talk about that redemption. And yet, with spiritual terms, we can receive that redemption. Arthur Morgan gets his redemption despite him doing what we would consider irredeemable things. And we are all capable of, even if we never pay our parents back for the love that they invested in us. We've had friends that are better to us than we are to them. I mean, that's so hard. Like, I struggle with this. This is probably one of my biggest struggles in life right now. I have people who invest so much in me, and I can't possibly invest in them back. I mean, 30 seconds a day to check their messages feels like a huge chunk of my time. But and that's being like, these people invested. They show up, they subscribe. They're like, oh my gosh, like what you said meant so much to me. Like they invest in me, and I can't possibly give that back to them. All I can do is invest it forward. And thank God that Jesus is there to provide that ransom for wherever I missed, for whatever I can't make up for. I can't make up for all the people that invested in me. I just can't. I'm one person. I don't have it. More people have invested their time in me than I've invested in them. It's not fair, but life's not there to be just a bunch of checks and balances. It's not there to make sure everything balances out to a net zero. Jesus has the infinity. He will pour the money into the debt until all of it is gone. And then he will take care of the rest. All the people who invested in me, I thank you. And I appreciate it. Especially those who watched this video, invested their time. I appreciate that. They invest in me, and I may never be able to make it up to them. And I'm sure there's people that I invest in who will never make it up to me. But I don't want that. I don't want this zero-sum game. I want Jesus to be in charge of the redeeming. I want him to be the redeemer who lives. And I just want to do my best that I can in this life I'll never be worthy of it, but to live in the recognition that I have that redeemer and that I'm grateful for that. It should be a celebratory process, a thing that makes us very happy and not something that makes us very sad. And I think that's kind of my closing arguments about redemption. Aaron, anything you want to say before we take off here?
No, I'm glad you tackled the subject from a couple of different places I hadn't even considered.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah. It was your idea, so I'm glad I could provide at least something new about it. Yeah. I'm glad you brought it up to the criminal justice thing too, because I think it's so. We have such a perverse idea of what justice is because of our criminal justice system.
Probably needs to be a topic for another time.
I I feel like I'm not sure if I even have anything spiritually to say about that other than it's just it's so wildly off base. I always find it interesting when I see people who've achieved like actual redemption in prison and like the way they communicate versus the people who are just trying to make parole or make, get,
what would be interesting as a potential topic for the future is I know that we know a lot of through cultural osmosis and everything like that. We know a lot about how the Old Testament dealt with crime.
Okay.
But how did, and this would probably be through a lot of extra biblical sources. How did the early church deal with crime? Like interpersonally among members. And when I say early church, I'm talking about the, 400 years or so after Jesus' death.
That would be an interesting topic. I am thinking of a few examples that are in the Bible. I have one really notable one in Acts, a few in the Gospels themselves. got Judas.
Something to think about. Yeah, it's just something to think about.
Yeah. What was the primitive church's view on like
the purpose
criminal
of
justice?
purpose of crime, or the purpose of justice.
Or how they handled crime and justice, I guess we'll say that. Like, the handling of crime and justice, and that would be something interesting to study. Maybe in a couple of weeks, maybe down the road here. There's a lot we can glean from the Bible, and I would have to do a lot of research on that one. So maybe in a couple of weeks, but that would be a good one to look at, to see, because they were so wildly successful at changing people and so wildly forgiving about people's past. Well, at the same time, you can look at instances where they maybe committed a small infraction and God strikes them dead on the spot or something, where you just kind of go like, oh, wow. Okay. So how do they deal with this? Yeah. Interesting. Cool. Well, we will be back to our normal Bible studies next week. If you are here and you are just interested in reading, might I heavily recommend Aaron over here's book club. We are currently reading The Rights of Man by Thomas Paine, a very fascinating clapback to Edmund Burke, to somebody who I barely have any knowledge of, but it reads almost like a social media clapback for today. And if you are interested in being part of that, he's always looking for more members of the book club. Aaron, how would they join that?
So they could reach out to me on Facebook. That would be the perfect way to get the Discord invitation. And I'd love to have more people join me.
Sweet. If you're interested in joining us, Love for First Christians, I see we got a lot of viewers here just at the tail end. I apologize that the rush kind of happened after we're kind of closing out here, but your Redeemer loves you, and he was happy to pay that price for you. You should be happy to receive the package that he got. So I'll summarize with that. We would love to have you, any faith, any walk of life you're at. We have so many people, different perspectives. I value that. Diverse political, spiritual, religious opinions. If you want to ask any questions, or you have any, I think especially, this is kind of the place where I feel like I shouldn't ask my pastor this question. I feel like I would be judged. This is a great place and people to ask those questions with. Please join the group. I know a lot of people like reaching out to me personally, and I do love that. But I do think you will get something out of the community. I am one man. I am a very flawed individual. I have very specific things that I'm good at and bad at. When I worked in the missionary program, I had certain people that I was like, let me work on this one. I'm going to be good at reaching them. And certain people where I said, I am not going to be very good at reaching these people, and they're a job for somebody else. Like, we should know our strengths and weaknesses. So I appreciate all the people who reach out to me personally. We've done a lot of, through these streams, I've had many conversations with people who are coming to God, and I love that. And I love that they're reaching out to me for it. But if you do feel that you want that community, a group of people that includes myself as well as other people and their ideas, the Love First Christians is a great place to go. You're going to find where you can join here in the link description. It's a Discord group. Very friendly, very welcoming. Everybody's will make time for you. We love to have you. Aaron, thanks again for joining us this week. I appreciate it. You're always, I appreciate you picking up the slack with, I don't want to say slack. Patty, I hope you're doing well. I hope you're listening, and I hope you're okay. But it's just good to have somebody to talk to as opposed to listening to me monologue forever.
Absolutely.
All right. Have a good night, guys. I appreciate it. We'll see y'all next week.